This week on Vaticano, St. Peter's Basilica reopens for pilgrims and visitors after being closed for more than 2 months. The world celebrates the 100th anniversary of the birth of St. John Paul II. Stay with us to witness celebrations in Rome and learn about St. John Paul II's hometown of Wadowice in Poland. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. St. Peter's Basilica, preparing to receive visitors and pilgrims again after being closed for more than 2 months. The Vatican City State's Health and Hygiene Department ensured that the basilica was safe and clean for its reopening.
La sanificazione è una procedura che
Sanitization is a fairly simple procedure, but involves a series of phases. First of all, a classic cleaning using the usual water and soap detergents must be carried out. After that, it is necessary to use substances which, in this case today, are sprayed onto the surfaces and, let's say, have the aim of quantitatively reducing the bacterial and viral load on all surfaces.
La carica batterica e virale su tutte le superfici.
The Vice Director of the Vatican City State's Health and Hygiene Department, Andrea Arcangeli, says that the team is conscious of the need to work carefully so as not to damage the basilica's artwork.
Practically all the spaces where there is more movement of people, so we are talking about the floors, the altars, the sacristy and the stairs, practically all the surfaces.
And even the statue of St. Peter was readied for the May the 18th reopening. Changes have come with the reopening to ensure safety. Now, to enter inside the basilica, one needs to go through security and health checks. This work requires more resources, and for this reason, the usual custodians of the Vatican Basilica, the Gendarmerie Police, are collaborating now with the Inspectorate for Public Security at the Vatican and volunteers from the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Visitors now face slower-moving lines and these additional procedures, but it hasn't kept them from the attraction of the splendor and spiritual wealth of St. Peter's Basilica. St. Peter's was ready to welcome visitors, but you may be asking yourself about the hundreds of other churches in Rome reopening the same day. After a request from the Diocese of Rome, 9 teams of hazardous material specialists were dispatched to disinfect Rome's 300-plus parish churches, inside and out. This enormous task was carried out in cooperation with the Italian Army and Rome's Environmental Office. To attend public masses, the Italian faithful must wear face masks and maintain a distance of at least 1 meter from each other. Church authorities must clean and disinfect the spaces between the celebrations and limit the number of congregants to those who can safely observe these conditions.
Il servizio è messo a disposizione gratuitamente alle parrocchie.
A young Italian Catholic, Daniele Chierico, in order to ensure the health precautions, is offering an innovative solution to churches seeking to best manage what can be a complicated situation. Daniele, thanks for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about how your portal called veniamoinchiesa.it or Let's Go to Church works?
Insieme al mio amico informatico.
Together with my tech-savvy friend Nicola Patilla, I created this portal, also with suggestions from our parish priests. Then we noticed that there were difficulties in managing the influx of the faithful during phase 2 of the COVID emergency, and for which we then created the Veniamo in Chiesa portal, which basically allows the reservation of places not only for the liturgies, but also for the other parochial formation events. With this system, therefore, one avoids the faithful arriving at the church, finding it full, being unable to attend the celebration.
Trovandola al completo, non posso accedere alla celebrazione.
And who can apply for this service?
Il servizio è messo a disposizione.
The service is made available free of charge to parishes and also to all Italian dioceses. Parishes that register will be able to organise liturgical and formation events indicating the place, the day, the time, and the number of places available. While the faithful will access the portal and will be able to access without registration, they will search for their own parish, reserve their place, and register their names for the parish priest. Then they will check in at the entrance of the church, giving their booking code.
Oppure lasciando semplicemente il codice di prenotazione.
And have you thought, Daniele, about taking this international, going abroad, maybe into different languages as well?
Sì, in questi giorni ci sono arrivate alcune
Yes,
richieste
we've
anche da
even
Spagna.
had some requests from Spain in recent days. In fact, we have also very quickly organised a site in Spanish for all countries. It will be called something very similar to Veniamo in Chiesa. We will call it venimusal'iglesias.com, and it will handle all the requests in Spanish that come from different countries. The project will obviously be able to extend anywhere in the world to anyone who requests the service.
A chiunque ci richiederà il servizio.
Thanks so much, Daniele, for this innovative solution to a crisis that we have on our hands.
Thank you.
In a few moments, we'll be back with more on Vaticano. Providentially, the reopening of Italian churches for public Mass on May the 18th coincided with the 100th anniversary of St. Pope John Paul II's birth. And for this occasion, Pope Francis, for what would be his last televised daily morning Mass, celebrated not at the usual Santa Marta Guesthouse Chapel, but at the very tomb of St. John Paul II in St. Peter's Basilica. Quoting from the day's responsorial psalm, the Holy Father reflected on the gift St. John Paul II was to the Church.
Oggi noi qui possiamo dire
Today we can say here, 100 years ago, the Lord visited his people, sent a man, prepared him to be a bishop and lead the Church.
e guidare la Chiesa.
In memory of St. John Paul II, we take this up again. The Lord loves his people. The Lord visited his people. He sent a pastor.
Ha inviato un pastore.
Pope Francis pointed out three of St. John Paul II's qualities in particular: prayer, closeness to the people, and love for justice.
Primo compito di un vescovo è pregare e lui lo
The
sapeva.
first task
E lui
of a
lo
bishop
faceva.
is to pray,
Pastore
and he knew
è
it.
vicino al
He
popolo.
did it.
E San Giovanni Paolo
A
II
shepherd is
ci ha
close
dato
to the
l'esempio
people,
di questa
and
vicinanza.
St. John Paul II gave us the example of this closeness, close to the great and the small, to the near and the far, always close.
Che voleva la giustizia.
A man who wanted justice, social justice, the justice of peoples, justice that drives out wars. But he also was a man of mercy, because mercy and justice cannot be separated.
Non si possono distinguere.
Pope Francis also recalled that St. John Paul II promoted the Divine Mercy devotion during his pontificate and canonized its earthly messenger, Polish nun St. Faustina Kowalska. The Vatican's Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments also issued a decree on May the 18th, establishing that St. Maria Faustina Helena Kowalska, Virgin, be inscribed in the general Roman calendar, and that her optional memorial be celebrated by all on the 5th of October. This new memorial shall be inserted into all the calendars and liturgical books for the celebration of the Mass and the Liturgy of the Hours. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI also paid homage to St. John Paul II on the anniversary. He sent a letter to Pope John Paul II's former personal secretary, now Cardinal Stanislav Dziwisz, the Emeritus Archbishop of Krakow, Poland. In the message, the Pope Emeritus wrote that Pope John Paul II had faced an almost impossible task after his 1978 election, the turbulent years after the Second Vatican Council. From the first moment on, John Paul II aroused new enthusiasm for Christ and his Church. His words from the sermon at the inauguration of his pontificate, "Do not be afraid, open wide the doors for Christ," this call and tone would characterize his entire pontificate and made him a liberating restorer of the Church. The Pope Emeritus, in his letter, also remembered John Paul II's life from his birth in a newly independent Poland to his death on April 2, 2005, in Rome on the eve of the Feast of Divine Mercy. Pope St. John Paul II was born in Wadowice, Poland on May the 18th, 1920. He was the youngest of 3 children and named after his father, Karol. He knew his mother, Emilia, but briefly, for she died when Karol was only 9 years old. The Wojtyła family lived in an apartment in a house next to the Basilica of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Karol's only window looked across the narrow street to the side wall of the church, upon which was found a sundial with the inscription, "Time flies, eternity awaits." In this basilica, Karol Wojtyła was baptized, received his first communion, and served as an altar boy. Visiting his hometown in June of 1999, St. John Paul II recalled that it was here that everything began for him, his life and schooling, his love of theater, and his priestly vocation. Time flew and Karol became a priest, a bishop, a cardinal, and then Pope John Paul II. He was striving for eternity and gave an example of holiness. And now the city of Wadowice will be forever connected with its most renowned citizen, Karol Wojtyła, Saint John Paul II. In 1979, a year after his election as Pope, he made an historic trip to his homeland, which forever changed the course of Polish history. The Pope arrived to then communist Poland in the capital city of Warsaw. He kissed the earth, and one of his first phrases was a plea for liberation. "Come, Holy Spirit, and renew the face of the earth."
Ja, syn polskiej ziemi, a zarazem ja, Jan Paweł II papież. Wołam z całej głębi tego tysiąclecia. Wołam w przeddzień święta zesłania. Wołam wraz z wami wszystkimi. Niech wstąpi duch Twój. Niech wstąpi duch Twój i odnowi oblicze ziemi, tej ziemi.
Patrzony w przedziwną postać świętej Jadwigi.
Visiting the national shrine of Our Lady of Częstochowa, Pope St. John Paul II began his homily speaking about St. Hedwig of Silesia. by divine providence. He was elected Pope on her feast day. As he himself put it, she is the saint honored on the day of the election of the first Pole to the chair of Peter, John Paul II. The same divine providence brought about the discovery in April of this year of Saint Hedwig of Silesia's relics, considered lost for hundreds of years.
Po raz pierwszy do Trzebnicy przyjechałem jako kilkunastoletni chłopak.
Father Piotr Filas is the rector of St. Hedwig's Shrine in Trzebnica, Poland. He says that since childhood he's been a frequent pilgrim to the shrine, not imagining that one day he would hold the precious relics in his own hands. St. Hedwig was a princess, a wife, a mother, and evangelizer of the region. Without taking religious vows, she spent the last days of her life here in the monastery in prayer. This is why the church is adorned with many depictions of the saint. The relics were found as the burial monument of St. Hedwig underwent restoration work.
Kilka miesięcy temu zostałem tutaj proboszczem.
I became a parish priest here a few months ago, and I began with practical things. I started to restore the monument. I knew it in my heart that this place is special for many people.
Jest szczególne dla wielu ludzi.
Father Piotr says that one day he noticed a crack in one of the sides of the monuments. It was opened and a silver reliquary was found. A Latin inscription confirms the relics are those of the 13th century Saint Hedwig of Silesia.
Dotarło do mnie tak
It struck me so personally that this was no coincidence. We could have discovered it much earlier or possibly never at all.
For Father Piotr in the city of Trzebnica, this discovery is a sign of God's providence. Not only that it came leading up to the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the birth of Polish Pope St. John Paul II, but also that St. Hedwig of Silesia is a great example of a worker of mercy. She personally took care of the sick and the poor, these works of mercy that we are in special need of right now during the pandemic. We'll be back after a short break with more on Vaticano. Rome's Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, known simply as the Angelicum, has just inaugurated the St. John Paul II Institute of Culture. Celebrating the university's most renowned alumnus, the St. John Paul II Institute for Culture will offer study of the teachings of Karol Wojtyła.
Karol Wojtyła is the most famous and the most outstanding student of the Angelicum. To open a new institution under his patronage is an honor and a great source of joy for our university. But for a rector who happens to be Polish and who may be considered to belong to the JP2 generation, there is an additional deep wellspring of joy.
Pope Francis sent a letter to the university's rector, Father Michał Pauluk, to mark the inauguration. The Holy Father told him that he's pleased that this initiative has found a home in the University of St. Thomas Aquinas. Karol Wojtyła studied philosophy at the Angelicum from 1946 to 1948. "100 years ago, on May the 18th, the mother of St. John Paul II, Emilia Wojtyła, chose to give life to her son Karol after a difficult and life-threatening pregnancy. Ido Etienne's news resource in Italian, Aci Stampa, broke the story that doctors advised Emilia Wojtyła to abort her child. the future Saint Pope John Paul II.
Il marito ha chiamato l'ostetrica.
Aci Stampa contributor Wojciech or Włodek Rejok brought this story to life.
Włodek, perché
Why was Emilia advised to abort her child?
Emilia Wojtyła ha scoperto nell'autunno del 1919 di essere incinta.
In the autumn of 1919, Emilia Wojtyła discovered that she was pregnant. It was already her third pregnancy. Her eldest son, Edmund, was 13 years old. The second pregnancy went badly, in the sense that her newborn daughter died immediately after childbirth. In 1919, as I said, it was Emilia's third pregnancy and she had heart problems. The doctor, a famous doctor in Wadowice, said openly that the pregnancy was at risk and there was a risk not only for the child, but first and foremost for the mother.
Il bambino, ma prima di tutto il rischio per la madre.
perché ha deciso
And why did Emilia choose to give birth despite the danger to her own life, in the doctor's opinion?
e i consigli del medico?
Per loro accettare
For them, it was not possible to accept abortion because it would be the killing of the baby in the womb. We can only imagine the drama of this loving couple. They were a very close-knit and committed couple who, in order to carry the pregnancy, were risking the life of the mother. The mother, who had another 13-year-old son who had need of a mother, but despite everything, as I said, for religious principles, because of their faith, they decided to go forward with the pregnancy.
per la loro fede hanno deciso di andare avanti con la gravidanza.
E Włodek, come
And what can you tell us about the moment when John Paul II was born?
a quel punto, come è andato il parto?
Perciò il marito ha chiamato l'ostetrica.
So her husband called the midwife and left his wife in the hands of the midwife, and he, together with his son, went to church because the Marian office for the month of May began at 5 p.m. That day, May 18th, was a very hot day, up to 30 degrees, 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Emilia asked to open the windows wide, and in the room where she was giving birth, you could hear the voice sound, the song coming from the church, which is right in front of Wojtyła's apartment. In this way, the little Carol was born between 5 and 6 p.m., hearing the singing of the Loretan litanies of Our Lady, coming from the parish church in Wadowice.
Sentendo il canto delle litanie lauretane che venivano dalla chiesa parrocchiale di Wadowice.
Bellissimo, grazie tante.
The cause for canonization of St. John Paul II's parents was formally opened in May of this year in Poland. Without the strong faith and pro-life attitude of the Wojtyła family, the world wouldn't have St. John Paul II. The 10th Italian edition of the March for Life, scheduled for this May, has been moved to next year. But the organizers haven't given up, and with the help of the EWTN Vatican Bureau, launched an online initiative called Connected for Life.
E chiaramente a tutta l'equipe di EWTN che ha permesso